With this video on literary devices, I will be explaining connotations and denotations. Now, I have two sentences here with just one word being different. The first, there was a strong odour coming from the house next door. The second, there was a strong fragrance coming from the house next door. Now, I have two very different images in my mind. With the first, I picture a terrible smell, possibly mouldy food or trash coming from the house next door. Yet, with the latter, I picture a positive smell, possibly scented candles or perfume coming from the house next door. These are examples of connotations. Yeah, maybe you didn't know this. The words mean the exact same thing. They both just mean a particular smell. This is an example of a denotation. So, denotations are essentially the definition, what the word actually means, what you'd find in the dictionary under such a word. Odour and fragrance both mean a particular smell, they're nouns. When you think of denotations, I want you to just think of the first two letters, DE, and connect that to definition. That's how I do it. However, with connotations, these are essentially the connections our minds make. Odours make us think of bad smells, whereas fragrances make us think of positive smells. Connotations are essentially the emotional or imaginative connection we have with a word. So let's take the word look. Synonyms of the word are stare, gaze, and examine. These are all denotations. However, connotations of each word bring very different emotional and imaginative pictures to our minds. For instance, when I hear the word stare, I think of a creepy guy staring at people who, it makes them feel very uncomfortable. When I think of the word gaze, I picture a couple in love and looking at one another. And when I hear the word examine, I think, either looking under the microscope, a scientist perhaps, or an investigator like Sherlock Holmes looking at clues. Now, all of these words have the same denotation, they have the same definition, but they have very different connotations, very different connections. Let's take this chappie here. On the left, the man had a cheap phone. On the right, the man had an inexpensive phone. These words have the same denotation, they have the same definition. However, the word cheap has negative connotations. When I hear this word, I think the phone is poor quality, that the man is stingy, or that the man has little money. However, when I hear the word inexpensive, I have positive connections. The word has positive connotations. I think of a bargain. I think the man is thrifty and good with money, and that he gets more for less. Connotations are incredibly important. When an author writes a text, it's fair to say that they really consider and think about the words they use. They think what connections the readers will make in their minds. Let's take these three people. Richard is suspicious. Now, when you think of this, do you have positive or negative connections? What do you think about him as a character? Is he a good character or a bad character, perhaps? Amanda is inquisitive. Again, does this have positive or negative connotations? What do you think of her? And Ted is curious. What do you think of him? Positive, negative? To reiterate, connotations are very important, and the author will choose their words carefully because we make such connections with our brains. Let's look at some examples from literature. Now, this is from Lord of the Flies by William Golding. The main character on the first page is described as the boy with the fair hair. Now, the denotation of fair in this sense is light in colour. But connotations to fair hair, well, many people think of angels, cherubs, these angelic light people. In symbology, light is often seen as innocent and pure and good, and therefore fair hair has connotations with good things. But another definition or denotation of the word fair is equal, just. So given that the boy is described in such a way, do you think he's going to be the protagonist of the story or the antagonist, the good guy or the bad guy? Probably the good guy. Let's look at this excerpt. He slashed a black bar of charcoal across his face. Now, in the story, to give you some context, the character is trying to camouflage himself to go hunting. So he puts black charcoal on his face. Now, the author just means that he rubbed charcoal on his face, but he used the word slash deliberately. Now, when I think of the word slashed, I think of a knife cutting someone. It's a violent act. Now, is this character going to be a pacifist, a good character who's very peaceful, or are they more likely to be a violent character? This is from Romeo and Juliet. We have an example of a metaphor here. We can still think about connections our brains make with metaphors and similes. So, for instance, Juliet is described as the sun. Now, when you think of the sun, what connotations come to mind? Well, the sun is very bright, it's beautiful, it protects us from the night, which is dark. Similarly, by her own father, she's described as baggage. Now, when you think of the word baggage, you might think of something heavy we carry around, a burden on us, or you might think of an accessory. Whenever we have similes or metaphors, we need to think about what is being described. So, for instance, if Juliet is being described as baggage, what connotations do we have with the word baggage? If a fire is being described as a jaguar, what connotations do we have with a jaguar? For instance, it's a predator. So I might think that the fire is predatory and is going to kill someone. How would that look like, though, if you are analysing a text for either an analysis table, a paragraph, or an essay? How does Lenny's physical description characterise him? This is from the story of Mice and Men. Well, the animal imagery used to describe Lenny characterises him as incredibly strong and powerful, yet innocent and naive. This is evident when, in chapter 3, Curly attacks Lenny. However, despite Lenny's obvious strength and physical advantage, he covered his face with huge paws and bleated when Curly punches him. Now, when you think of the word huge paws, what comes to mind? Well, paws, I know, like wolves have paws, dogs have paws, bears have paws. They're also huge, so a bear comes to my mind. However, the word bleated is a verb used with sheep. Sheep bleat. So, on the one hand, I've got these huge paws, which make me imagine Lenny as a huge bear-like person, very strong, very powerful. But the word bleated makes me think of a timid, weak sheep. So we get this kind of paradox there. This reveals Lenny to be physically strong and yet mentally weak, almost childlike. And it characterises Lenny in such a way that develops the theme of the weak versus the strong. This is how I would use a table. So level 1, I would always look at connotations and what connections I have to particular words, phrases, or other devices such as similes and metaphors. And then level 2, I think, well, what does that reveal about the story as a whole, the characters, the plot, the setting, for instance. And level 3, I might connect that to a theme or the real world. Okay, but looking at connotations is always going to be a level 1 thing. Thanks for watching, guys.